Welcome to another video about building model wooden boats. Today we're going to build the Jolly Boat of the HMS Bounty. Captain Bligh and his crew set out from England in 1787 for a mission in the South Pacific. About 2 years into that mission there was the famous mutiny on the Bounty, and at that time that mutinous crew set Captain Bligh and 18 men afloat in this Jolly Boat built for 15. And they ended up having to sail about 3,600 miles to safety in Indonesia. Quite an adventure. So let's take a look at building this boat. I haven't opened it yet, so let's take a look and see what's inside. So here's the box it came in. And all the goods. So here's all the planks and some mahogany wood, the stand and some sails. Here's some of the various other parts that are needed. Some of the brass hardware and a stand and some line and rigging. A fairly complete set of instructions and a plan. I don't know how this fits, but let's get started. So I did some research on how best to remove the char from where the laser cut, you can see this here, from where the laser cut kind of left some charcoal and some rough surfaces. And what I found is that if the surface is not to be seen, you only need to smooth it out, and that's what I did with some 220 grit sandpaper. I smoothed all these surfaces so that when it comes time to gluing, they have a nice smooth surface where you can bond them. I even went inside because these will be glued on there and kind of smooth them out. Now if these surfaces turn out to be seen, then they will not look so good. Even if you paint them, the paint may have a different absorption. Some people led me to believe that the paint would have a different absorption feature and it would give a surface looking difference. Okay, I finished step one. I put all the frames in. Where the char showed, I just smoothed it out for gluing. Where it did show, I took as much as I felt like I should take off, and it's good to go, and I'm ready for step two to attach this, and step three to put the mahogany on top. Step three is to put in these floorboards. There's one long piece, 6 intermediate pieces, and then 6 shorter pieces. Then after that you put in the stern thwarts and this bow piece here. So on to that process. They give you just the right amount of pieces of wood. There's no spare, so there's no mistakes. You have to take one long piece and cut it for the medium and the small one. There's no leftovers even. So the medium one is 1/67, so I've marked it right here at 1/67, and I cut it a 1/2 millimeter longer than it should be, and I sand it down so it fits, and I fit it into the floorboard. So with that mark, I put it on the vise and I cut it. And then the remaining piece, you measure for the 140 and you cut it, and with this one piece of wood you get 2 with no spares. And I'll match it to the boat, and it looks like it fits perfectly. I butt it up against this end and it fits right in this frame. I couldn't get the first 3 floorboards on the side here to lay flat because of the curvature, so I sanded it down. And it's the same back here. The second set of 3 wouldn't fit flat, so I had to sand this a little bit because it also was curving up. As I was preparing my floorboards made of African walnut, I found one of the boards was halfway white, and there didn't seem to be any other way that I could use it without having a white board. So I thought I would stick with that, but eventually it began to get to me, and I looked and found another long piece of wood from another model, and I cut a piece out and shaped it so that it would replace that white one. Oh, I thought it came out very nice. So I got the next set of parts out, these thwarts and this bow rail. And it's not clear to me what's taking place here. When I lay it on like the pictures, there's a gap. I don't know if you can see that. There's a gap there, right here. And I can't tell if I'm supposed to have this space reserved for something underneath, or do I sand these down? Once I sand it down, it's going to be hard to unsand it if it was a mistake. So here's where this drawing comes handy. Here, this little hatched area here, number 18, is this bow rail. And it looks like the false keel comes up above it, and there's going to be a board added in there. But it seems to be at an angle. By adding this ruler in there, you can see there's an angle in there, so I'm thinking, oh, come on. There, see, it's kind of slanted down a little bit. So after looking at some of the other Jolly boats that have been built, I noticed I don't have a color scheme selected. And I'm starting to enclose all the frames in here and everything, and if I chose to paint some of these frames, it's going to be difficult the more I assemble. So I paused my build for a while to take a look at my color scheme. And after giving it some thought, I thought I better just leave all the interior wood just as wood as it is. But I'll do my paint on the outside, on the hull and on the spars, some of the deck equipment, and that's what I'm going to do. But it also occurred to me that in my next boat build, I should have a color scheme chosen in mind before we start. So I think this will work out. But then the next thought occurred to me, I don't really have a workspace in my garage set up to do painting when I get around to it. And my workbench is awful small and everything. So I decided to pause my boat build even longer, and I built a new workbench in the garage and got it taken care of. That took a little while. And then I found some plans online for a spray booth from Ventworks. So now that I got my garage all straightened out, I'm back to working on the boat. And I tell you, it just seems like it's just a never-ending series of choices and things that go wrong and decisions that have to be made. I guess that's part of the fun, if you can call it that. I went and put on these back, I think they call them thwarts, and a bow rail here. They got another name for it, Batola or something. And I put these seats on, and I put the mast foot and a little step device here to hold the mast up. And I'm ready to start talking about planking. And the more I look at this white ramen wood, the less I like it. So there's all of a sudden I'm stuck with a choice. A lot of guys have painted the interior of the boat, and I don't want to paint it. I'll paint the outside, but I'm far enough along now, and I really want to focus on putting on planks, so I'm not going to paint it. So, but this looks awful plain. I guess I could live with that. The other thought was, I had some cherry wood, or the other wood I have is oak. So all of a sudden I got one of these choices to make. I don't know. It's too much artwork for me. So what I've decided I'm going to do is I really want to work on planking. I'm going to remove these ramen seats and use some warm water, soften the glue, pull them off, and set them aside. And I'm going to go on to planking. There's probably a lot of decisions to be made in planking as well. I think I got a good process started. We'll talk about that here shortly. The boat is kind of wide here in the beam, and it's awful narrow in the front. So it's going to require some drop planks where there's not as many planks up front, and we'll talk about that. And the kit provides a lot of these nice 5mm planks, which I plan to use. But in order to drop the planks, it provides these narrow little ones that you can see the plank kind of comes to a point, and you kind of put it in here, and you have fewer planks up front. And that's not normally how larger kits have been done, not the instructions I've seen anyway. And these narrow planks also represent kind of a part that's not used in real life. The real big boats don't use such pointy points like that. They wouldn't survive the stress of being out on the ocean. And so I really wanted to do the way the professionals or the larger museum quality boats are done, and they're not with this kind. And I learned some techniques in the last tutorial I did on the Model Ship World half hull planking kit. That's this one back here. And they showed me how to do this, and I kind of wanted to practice on this kit to do that. So that's what we're going to do in this video, is we're not going to use these narrow ones. We're going to do drop planks and add planks if I need to. And then we're going to do some tailoring and some spiling, and I'll talk about that. So what I learned in that kit, and I got to do, is first you measure these frames, how long they are, and you use these little pieces of paper. I cut them up, and you lay them along each frame. You put them underneath there, and you put a little tick mark on them, and then with that I measured how far they are, and I used millimeters, and I recorded them on this piece of paper here. And I call this double one, frame 1 all the way to frame 10, and I wrote down, this here actually is fairly narrow, 17 millimeters, but in the middle there's 62 millimeters. So using these 5 millimeter planks, there's about 12 planks here at the beam. And you can't fit all 12 planks here in 17 millimeters. So what you do is you would take one of these planks and you can sand them down. They recommend you do about half the width of a plank, so 5 millimeters means you could sand them down to 2.5. So you make these planks come along and they're a little more narrow, 2.5, but there still isn't room for all of the planks, and so you do a drop plank where you kind of cut them in different than these little pointy ones, and we'll come to that. Now, it's not quite sure if I have to do an add plank or at the back here. I think there's just the right amount. We'll have to see when we get there. So that's what I'm planning to do, is I made the measurements, and I'll show you here what I've got on my piece of paper and the process we're going to follow, and then I'm just going to do it. And you will see how it goes along. And if you really want to know the details, I recommend you study it on a piece of paper, such as getting that tutorial from Model Ship World, or looking at my last video, or figure it on your own. There's lots of books and papers on how to do that. But I'm trying to get better at it, and there's nothing like doing it for me. So let's move on to the next step and start the planking process. Then I did my best to sand off these corners here so that when the planks lay, they have a nice even surface to be glued upon. Next, I took a length of plank and soaked it in warm water for a while, and while it was wet, I laid it up against the keel here to lay the garboard plank, and used these clips and held it in place until it dried. I let it dry overnight the first time, but you don't have to let it dry so much, but I did, and so maybe it'll hold its shape for a while. And then I marked along here where I'm going to cut, and this will become the first plank, and I'll do the same on the other side. So this is the process I followed to achieve the goal. The idea would be to have the frames run from stern to fore in a straight line and not be too narrow at the bow. So I had to figure out how to do that, and I used an Excel spreadsheet to get my numbers all to balance out. The first thing you do is you measure each frame from the top to the bottom. I laid a little piece of paper along there and made a tick mark, pull it off and measured it, and the result was frame 1 is 18 millimeters, frame 2, 3, 4 all the way down here to frame 10. And in frame 10 down here, you see the frame is a little short, but the planks still run on the keel here, so part of the keel is 25 and 14, so the total amount you have to account for is 53 and 49. And the widest frame is here at frame 6 at 62 millimeters. That would be this one here, so that's the longest frame. Now once you've managed to figure out the length, what you got to realize is the first two frames, first two planks down here don't really reach to the leading edge of frame 1 because it kind of curves up a little bit, and these are a little shorter. I've laid them already, and you can see that the plank doesn't reach. This is where the leading edge of frame 1, and this is the leading edge of frame 2, and they just touch there. So these two lengths stand, but the rest of them you subtract out the 12 millimeters from these first two planks. They're 6 millimeters each, 12 millimeters result. So the number of planks that each frame sees is 10, 10, and then the rest see 12 planks. But the amount you're going to be adjusting for is 10, 10, and then 10 all the way across, because there's 10 planks to lay on these two, but there's 10 planks to lay on the rest. Subtract the 2 that are already installed. So these are the number of planks that represent the rest at 5 millimeters. 10 planks all the way across. That'll be fitting on here. So then the remaining distance is what you got to get those 10 planks to fit in. And you can see the distance here in frame 1 for those 10 planks is narrower than the distance here in frame 6, which is wider. And so the planks to be adjusted are 10, but the frame length without the garboard and broad strake is this. I have to use Excel. I can't figure this out in my head and write it down correct the first time. So this distance here is the 24 millimeters, which is what I measured up here. This distance is the 25 millimeters. But the amount of the amount of distance you're going to put these 10 planks in is not 40, but 24, which is the 40 minus the 12, which is then 28 millimeters 40. And so each plank of the remaining rest, you divide row E by D, 24 by 10, they're 2.4 millimeters, 25 by 10, they're 2.5, and this is the width of each of the remaining 10 planks. And down here I did a checksum to make sure they all add up. So I know it's a little bit complicated here. Let me give you a more reasonable picture of this. And I hope you understand that. But anyway, I'm going to proceed on, and you can watch what I do and then maybe come back and look at this. Next, I cut strips of wood for each frame. And the width of the strip would be equal to the width of the plank at that frame. And then I marked each of the frames with that width. And in that way I can ensure that I have the right measurements and measure my progress as I go along. I then used those strips of wood, marked the plank, and drew a line. And now I shall cut those with an X-Acto blade. Next I use an X-Acto blade and cut along the lines that I had marked, sanded them, and installed them. I've used plank benders and spiling and all kinds of tricks, but turns out I just think putting them in warm water while they're wet, pinning them on the boat, and letting them dry gives them good shape, good enough to then glue on. And it takes a little while for them to dry overnight. I've tried a hair dryer, that sort of works as well. But I'm proceeding on this slowly because I got other things to do. So I do a pair of planks a day, and this is what they look like. And I'll trim them up here in the bow when I get around to putting in the false keel. After installing the first couple of planks, I updated the actual measurements, and there really wasn't much of an update to the width of these planks, but I did have a little bit of a wrinkle here where this part of the wood looked like it was going to have a hard time making this very sharp corner. So as you can see here in the instructions for filing, what I wanted to show you is the keel is here, the frame comes up, and there's a pretty sharp angle there, and you really don't want that to divide your plank, because then you have to build the sand or bend the plank into a U shape. So what I did was widen this particular plank. The Excel spreadsheet shows these coming down getting narrower and narrower, but if I made this one a little wider to meet with that junction and then made the next plank a little narrower, the overall width would be about the same, but the junction would be made right here. And then it makes for a nice smooth transition. And I did that on the same side over here. So we have some temporary guests living with us and 4 grandchildren. So I've had to move out of my upstairs room down into the garage, which is a little cooler, but I'm all set up, and here I am working on the boat again. So up to now, these planks I've been able to lay fairly flat across the top here and to be shaped a little bit as they go, but we're coming to that part where it's quite wide here and the bow becomes quite straight up and down. I don't know if you can see right here, but there's a good sized gap there. And it's hard to push this laterally up to get it. So I think it's that time of the boat where we'll start spiling some of these planks. It's the same here in the stern. It comes to the back. Let's get this flat. It comes to the back and it's like there's an awful lot of gap here. And to get this to curve up requires too much of a curve or the wrong way. So I'm going to spile the next few planks. And the way I've been spiling is getting this thick kind of see-through tape, and I lay it across one of the top planks that are straight. That seems to be a nice shortcut. And you lay it on there so it's a nice straight fore-aft lay. See, now it's got a little bit of a curve to it. Let's try it again. So I lay it down across one of these top planks that are fairly straight. And you can kind of see the dark where there's no plank and the light where there is a plank. And I take a Sharpie and I put a dot where the plank's above end, here and here. And then I put a dot along on a regular basis, denoting where the edge is. And then I pull this sheet off and lay it over on my sheet of basswood. As you can see here, like that. And when you get a completed set of dots, you take an X-Acto blade and you cut it out. Once you cut the piece out, make sure that it's, you measure and make sure that it's thicker at all the frames that you want so that you can sand it and shape it. I've done all the work and found out that it's too thin in one spot, so you got to make sure it all fits well before you get too far along. And then you sand it and get it the right shape and the right dimensions and everything like that. And you're happy with it. Then I soak the wood in warm water. I've done both the boiling water in this pot and just hot tap water. And they both seem to work. I think the boiling water gets it softer quicker, but either one of them is just fine. And I let it soak for 4 or 5 minutes. And once it's all done, it's kind of pliable. Let me get this out of the way here. It's kind of pliable. Then you put it on, you clamp it in place, and I found that if you start with the stern and walk around, you got a pretty stiff bend here at the bow. So I always start at the bow and clamp it down first and work my way back to where it's. Once it's soaked long enough to become soft, you clamp it in place and you let it dry overnight. And once it's dry, we unclamp it, we dry fit it into the frame, make sure there's no gaps, sand what needs to be sanded, and then we glue it in place. Well, I tell you, there was so much going on in this house with my daughter and her whole family living here that I had to lay off working on the boat for a while. Summer came and I cut a couple cords of wood. I've been out hiking, renting sailboats, and I just couldn't devote the time. But it's the end of summer, it's starting to cool down, and now I have some time, so I'm back at working at the boat. And I reviewed the movie I've made so far, and I noticed that I have one update, and then I'm now progressing to finish this up. And that is when I said I laid this tape, as you can see here, I would take this tape and lay it across the boat. I stated that I would lay it across the top of the keel or one of these flatly laid planks, but that's turned out to be not working so good, and I think I found a better way to do this. And that is, when I lay this tape across here, I don't try to keep it lined up with the top. I take the center of this tape and lay it with the part sticking. Let me see if I can get this here. and lay it so that the sticky part of the tape runs smoothly along the plank of interest. I don't worry too much about the top or the bottom, and I think that gets me a straighter, more true shape. And so then when I go and mark it, it doesn't have such a off curve. There was some of those just weren't fitting. And then when you lay it on the piece of wood, which I'm not going to do right now, I'll just put this on or store it away somehow. That's the small improvement I made since then. And also I've laid a few more planks. I don't know if you can tell or not. And I made another one here. And I'm going to proceed on with this process that I've been showing you. Another thought occurred to me is that in reality, in a real boat, you don't lay these long spiral planks like that. You do these sections, as I did in that planking tutorial. And I kind of took a shortcut and thought I would do these like what the kit showed. But it might have been better if I had done just planks of a certain length and there's a way to calculate how long they should be. And that would have also been easier than try to spile this whole piece of wood. But I'm far enough along. And I've done the spiling, and it might be that now, after a few more spiles, these standard planks that came with another kit might be able to be made to fit onto that. We'll see. But for the moment, I'm going to spile a couple planks on each side, go a little further, and I think it's going to look very nice myself. As it turns out, I ended up spiling all the planks. Still had a good sized curve and needed to be narrowed on both ends and a little bit thicker in the middle. And it just didn't make sense to use a kit plank. So I spiled them all. And I finished all this planking. I still have a little bit more to do. This is still the rough product at the moment. I got to sand that flat. I got to cut a groove in here for the bow portion. And trim up these on the end here. And then this top plank needs to be brought even to the frames here. And then I put one more plank on top. And then I put a gudgeon or a whale along, not a gudgeon, a whale along the side here. And I think that constitutes being done with the planking. So I finished the planking, I think, pretty much. I've sanded the hull flat. Sanded the back off and put a little putty on where some of the gouges and gaps were. And I started looking at my painting scheme. So as I put the keel on, it comes as 3 sections, the bow part and a couple of keel parts and then a third part here, a fourth part here. So I put some putty on there. I plan to paint this, so in theory that'll be smoothed out. If I looks like I need to do a little more sanding, I will. I think down here I'll have to do a little more. And then on this side, one of my clamps, when I was gluing the planks on, got a little aggressive and I dipped this in, pushed this in, and it dried that. So I smoothed it back out and I'll sand that off. I got to do a little bit more on there. And then I sanded this aft end and smoothed that up to some. I may have to work this over a little bit more. But pretty much that's all done. Maybe a little bit there. It's hard to say. When it's like this, it looks pretty good. So when I'm going to paint that, so I think that dark spot, there's no gouge there. It could have been a gouge, but it's not. So then I'm still kind of sorry that I put this top part on before I came up with a paint scheme. So underneath, I'm going to just leave that blank. But I'm going to stain the top part here, stain the wood here, and then I'm going to paint the bottom. That's what I've decided to do. And I didn't quite know what I was going to do the top, so I did some experiments. I worked with some semi-transparent stain here. I used some clear matte, and that just didn't show here at all. But I came up with either a golden oak transparent stain or a satin polyurethane. And the satin polyurethane, I don't know how well it shows in the camera, but this is pretty bland. And this is also a satin polyurethane, and a little bit darker than the unstained, but it's not dark enough for me. And then when I use this golden oak transparent, I kind of came dark. I don't know how well you can see that. But it's kind of dark here, and I put a brush on there and then wiped it off right away, and it didn't quite get smooth, and I fear that that will not look so good. So what I did is I put 1 part mineral spirits, and that's what this is here, 1 part mineral spirits, and then here is 3 parts mineral spirits, and that's lighter, darker, and straight stain. And I'm thinking I'm going to use the golden oak semi-transparent on this mahogany part, but on the basswood I'm going to use 1 part mineral spirits to 2 parts stain. I think I like that. So the diluted golden oak will go on this basswood and on the deck part, and the straight golden oak will go on these 2 parts here. And but the first part, now that I've made my decision on the top, the first thing I think I'm going to do is seal the bottom and paint it, and we'll see how that goes. Here's a picture of my spray booth. I sprayed a little sealer on the bottom so the paint will show. But the spray can to my surface primer is really odoriferous. It smells, and this fan is pretty strong, but it can't overcome that. So I kind of shrunk down the input a little bit here, so there would be a stronger flow through there, and that seemed to keep the fumes out of my garage. And so I'm going to take upstairs and take a look at it. On first impression, I might have to sand the whole bottom down again. We'll have to see. The fumes dissipated. I brought the boat up into these brighter lights, and sure enough, there were ridges between the planks where one plank was higher than the other, and you could tell that by the black line. It wasn't so obvious until I actually put the sealer on the hull. So I sanded the hull down, and the sealer helped. When I started to sand, the high spots turned into bare wood where the lower spots retained the sealer, and it helped me find where the high spots were, and I sanded it all down again and then sealed it, brought it back up, and here it is here. Those dark lines, maybe spaces, I don't know, but I think once I paint it with the actual white and gray that I'm going to paint it, it'll look good. And I still have to add another plank on the top, so there's still quite a bit left to do. So close is good enough, much better than it was the first time. So next I'm putting this top rail on. Per the instructions, I took this solid piece of wood and put it in this hot water. This time I boiled it with using the microwave and soaked it a little longer. And it was pretty pliable, and I had arranged some clamps that look like they will help form right on the top. And then I'm going to have to reseal again this top part up here. Kind of out of sequence, but I wanted to make sure my spray booth worked. I had all the right paints. I didn't have a color scheme for a while. And before I went any further, I just kind of wanted to experiment. You always got to look ahead and look for those kinds of things. So once I got that all squared out, and I found that I had some irregularities in here, so good thing I sprayed the sealer on there and found those high spots. Maybe as I get more used to this kind of stuff, I can spot them ahead of time. But anyway, the sealing it really helped me find it, and I got it smooth. So now that I'm ready, I'll go back a little bit, put this on, mount it, and then we'll proceed further. All right, so I've sealed the bottom of the boat. Oh, I see I missed the spot here. I sealed the bottom of the boat, getting ready to paint it. And because I didn't paint the inside before I put the deck on, I'm not going to paint inside here. But I thought I might paint this top part, and it'll be harder to paint once that's in. So I painted the top railing on the inside, and then I also sealed the outside. And then when I put this on, I will address the whole boat and paint my colors. So I've taken care of both these pieces. I've bent them, stained or put enamel paint on the top part on the inside, and now I'm going to assemble it. So here's the top planks put on. Kind of looks nice inside. I decided to do the oarlocks later because it was the plank that goes on here, and I suspect the depth of the oarlocks are related to how I put that plank on. So now I'm going to stain this side of the, or not stain, but paint this side of the boat. And I laid a water line on here, so the top part is going to be gray, the bottom part will be white. And I got this flexible tape, and I made a water line mark. It kind of looks crooked, but when you look at it straight away, there we go. When you look at it straight away, it should be flat. That's the way it's intended. And the way I did that was I got this little bubble level, and I didn't have a stand, so this was kind of up higher than I'm used to. And I put the boat on there, and I leveled it. And I kind of did this funky thing. I clamped my pencil down pretty tight, and got it where it was square on the bottom. And with this boat mounted on that clamp, I ran the boat around in a circle, so that line, in theory, should be the same height off the ground with the boat being leveled and all. And then I put this white tape on there, and now I think I'm ready to stain the top part, but not the inside. Well, it's been a couple of weeks since I marked that water line, and I've painted the hull completely. And I'm kind of happy with the colors. It took me a while to find the colors. There's a lot of Jolly Boat online, and they all have some magnificent looking colors, and I just didn't want to copy theirs, so kind of wanted to find a unique color scheme for me. And I found the gray and the white and the blue are in the scope of the historical colors of the time. So I chose those colors, and you look online, they say gray goes with everything. And so I think I got a nice set of colors. I like them right now, and it's going to sit on my shelf when I'm complete for a long time, and I'll get a chance to look at it. So it's been a good experiment. We'll see if I use these colors again. But what I did after I chose my colors, and it took me a long time to figure that out, what the colors were, and then I've always used enamel in my airbrush, enamel paint, and I spray it successfully, and I've got all the chemicals to clean the brush and to dilute the paint. It's oil-based paint, and how I spray it and everything. But I couldn't find any flat colors of this kind, the gray and the white and the blue. The stores had all the glossy kind of paint. When I talked to them, they say they're having supplier problems getting the flat paint. So I thought about going over to acrylic paints, but there's a lot of effort and different thinners and different mixing ratios, and then I have to spray it on similar wood and see how it looks and how many coats I use. So I just decided to stick with the enamel this time around. So that's what I did. So it took a while to get the right color paint and then find the actual bottles that I like. And then I did some experiments as well. But anyway, so I got that all done, and what I did was, after I drew this water line, I masked the top off. I built this mask here, as you can see, and put it on the top, and then I masked the bottom and sprayed the top gray, and then I masked the top, and after it dried, I masked the top and sprayed the bottom white. And I put on these bulkworks on the top and on the back, and I sprayed my side bulkwork here, or fender bender as it were, and painted it blue, put it all together. So this is where I am. And by masking it off, I haven't actually touched the interior, and I'll probably do that in a little bit. I think the next thing I'm going to do is start working on the rudder. I hope I don't ding up the paint job too bad, but it'd be harder to paint with the rudder installed, so I'll be very careful, and maybe I'll have to touch it up again. So that's where I am now. On to the next step. So I think the next task I'll do is installing this rudder. And it looks like it might be fairly complex. First, I'm going to take this rudder, which came with the kit, and sand all these edges off so they become smooth. And then I got to figure out how to install these brackets so that they perform this function of these pins fit into these slots, and then they go on the back of the boat, of course. But in my case, I think when I install this rudder like this, I think I'd like the white and the gray to line up. So I got to be careful, and then the bottom of the rudder needs to line up with the bottom of the boat.
So where does that line go and how do I determine it? Am I going to paint a black? I think not. I'm going to do a gray and white.
I found these brass straps to be a little bit tricky to manipulate. As you can see here, they require to be pinched around a little metal rod that acts as a shaft to hold the rudder to the stern of the boat. And I had a hard time doing that, but with a pair of pliers, I managed to get them together, and here's the result of what I've done. So I finished bending up all these straps and they're ready to install. There's still some bends and wrinkles in here. I buffed them out with my Dremel, so that doesn't look too bad. But after I did all that, I bought these plastic line pliers, nylon line pliers, and I think this was the tool to use to do that work. And I did a little bending beyond this and some of my other parts, and that works just fine. So these are ready to go. And then I cut these notches out here in the thwarts very carefully and then repainted where the wood was showing. And I installed these knees, or side thwarts, I don't know what they call them, the instruction book wasn't clear. And I got them installed. And so this is about ready to go. And then I spent some time building these oars. The rod they gave in the kit was really soft and not quite so good, so I managed to go out and buy some extra rod in case I broke one. And it was such a stiff wood, I don't know if it was pine or what, but it was so good that I made all my oars out of that pine. Made little handles and made little grooves here. Sanded and painted the oar paddles, and I haven't glued them together, but they'll look something like this. I painted the bucket, painted the axe, painted this rear platform. I made a tiller, and these are the brackets that brace the mast support at the base. So next I will install all of these parts, and once that's done, may not be quite so simple, I will start looking at the rigging. So I got the tiller installed. I got the rudder installed in the tiller, and it turned out the tiller, I originally put the block to run the main sheets down lower here inside the boat, but that wouldn't work because the block would then, the sheets would go across and you wouldn't be able to work the tiller, so I put this bar up on top. And now this kind of travels back and forth. That's not necessarily a good sailing configuration, but that's good enough for the model. I bought this nicer line from another kit, and I decided I'd do what they'll do on the larger boats. I took some thread and tied it here on the end. I'll trim those little bits off. I don't know if you can see them, but there they are. And then I took this thread, rubbed it in wax, which wasn't quite enough. It still got a little fuzz on there. And I wrapped it all the way around the line. That's called seizing the line, and what I plan to do is put it here on this mast right here, wrap it around the mast, and then seize that bit. You'll see here in a second what I've done. You stretch it between two clamps and wrap the line, and that's what I've done, and I kind of put a weight on here for the purposes of this video. Now that I've seized the shroud all the way around, I then looped it around the mast and then seized it again here. I got to tell you, putting these dead eyes on and trying to keep them level, you kind of want this to be level and you want that to be level, and but this has got a longer line, and in addition this has got to be a little longer on the back side. It's really a trick. I'm impressed with those guys who can do that. What I've done is taking these little resistors, and they're 30 gauge, I think, and the wire is, and they're soft. That's unfortunate. And what I'm doing is I'm putting them through one of the dead eyes here like this. And then I'm putting this other dead eye up here, something like this. And then I take my shroud and then hold it up with a little clip. And I filed off the teeth on one alligator clip, but I didn't file off any more, so I'm using these little clamps, which seem to work all right. And I kind of pre-bent these to be of the same length. And I can see this one's not quite, well, this one might be a little loose. It's kind of, they fell off too. And then there's a certain way you weave them. You can pull that offline. I don't know if you can see that or not, but there's a way in which you zip it. And but I didn't, and it needs to be a little closer per the drawing. But I'm going to pull them tight, so there's slack in here, and there's slack up here. So the mast needs to come back a little bit. So when I tighten it, they'll come down. The theory is now they'll come down to the distance they're supposed to be per the drawing. So for now, I'm done with the rigging. Next, I put up the front sails. That wasn't too difficult. These little circlets here, that brass rings that held the sails on the forestay, require some dexterity, but that's about it. Tied the knots on, put the halyards on. They're kind of laying loose down here. I don't know if you can see them or not. I'll add some more belaying pins here on the deck and then tie them down when I finally get finished. And I got some belaying pins added over here for the sheets to come back, starboard and port. And I'll tighten these up and square them, these dead eyes, when the time comes. They're pretty tight, but when the mast goes back and forward, there's a little bit of rigging. I temporarily attach the sail to the boom here and to the gaff, and the boom's supposed to ride up a little bit. I don't know if you can see that. With the boom all the way down, you can still see the gaff rides here in the rigging, but the boom needs to be up a little bit so it's well above the rigging. When in reality it should be down here, causing this big sag in the sail. A piece of cardboard that represents the sail that I'd like. It kind of goes flat against the mast. It rides above the bottom of the mast here at the bowsprit and below the rigging here. So the gaff, which I put away over here, rides up here, and the boom rides here, and it gives me all the adequate space I think I need. So this is the size of the sail I want. Turns out I had to cut 2 or 3 versions to get what I wanted, but there it is. And when I lay this desired sail on the sail I have, first off you can see, I think, let me take a look here. Yes. You can see that this sail kind of comes and curves down. In fact, none of these guys are actually straight and linear, but that's okay. We can live with that. And when you lay this kind of like that and like that, you can see that this sail's a little longer, and I can live with that. It's this bottom part that I think needs to be trimmed, which would then lower the sail down below the upper rigging and keep it off the deck. I'm thinking I'm going to double check that, but that's what I want. So if I leave this 3 sides stitched as is, potentially I can cut the bottom of the sail. But that's a little tricky. But my wife said she'd help me out, and I'm going to take her up on that. What she's going to have to do is unstitch all of this, fold it out so it's flat, taking this bolt rope off, lay this sail back on, leave whatever this is, couple millimeters, ½ inch something, on the bottom, and cut it, and then turn around and fold it back on and re-stitch it. And I guess this bolt rope will be a little bit longer, and these corners will be a little difficult. And but she's offered to help, so I'm going to shorten the sail. Maybe I should learn to sew one of these days. And here's my new sail, just the right size that I wanted. So my wife cut and sewed the sail. It looks pretty good. And I stitched it onto the boom and the gaff. And then I let it sit. And I went to work on my boat because I better get this stuff done before I put the main on. There'll be less room in there. And I put the 4 sails on in their final configuration. I tightened the halyards, and I put the sheets on. And I don't know if you can see or not, but I laid all the little lines in there.
so that this camera's sticky.
I think I'm done with the front. Well, here we are at the end of the video. I finally completed the boat. I mounted the main and did a few little things that needed to be done. I had to put the bucket in and a bucket rope and place an anchor in its place. Mounted the cannon and put the tiller on, and put in the main sheet line and so forth. I'll show some pictures here shortly. And it was a fun little boat. I enjoyed it, and I hope you did too. I'm going to make another boat now, and it'll take me another year to publish a video. Sorry, I put them out about once a year, but that's the way it works for me. And I hope you enjoyed this video. God bless you, and we'll see you in another year.